Hi everyone, my name's Dr. Melody Smith and I'm a clinical psychologist. If you've been to this channel before, then welcome back, but if you haven't, where have you been? On this channel, I upload videos for aspiring clinical psychologists to help them on their journey to becoming clinical psychologists. In this video, I'll be giving you my 5 top tips for the night before your clinical psychology doctorate selection test. I remember going for my clinical psychology doctorate selection test at Surrey University. I went twice. And it was really nerve-wracking. Both times I was fortunate enough to get an interview, but the first time around, I think I was far more nervous than the second time around. And there's some things that I picked up along the way that I'd like to share with you all to help you to settle your nerves the night before and feel a bit more confident going into doing the exam. Before we get into my 5 top tips, just a reminder to subscribe and ring the bell if you want to be notified whenever I release new content. So here are my 5 top tips. Top tip number 1, be practical. Go over the letter that invited you to the selection test and any correspondence since that's been about the selection test. Have a read of it and just check that you've got all the things that it specifies on the letter that you need to bring on the day. Also, you want to make sure you're bringing things like a couple of pens, just things that you might need when you're actually writing the selection test. Make sure you have those things packed and ready. You know where they are, they're ready to go, your pens are working and you're ready to go. Have a think about the things that you need to do in the morning of the selection test and just prepare whatever you can the night before so that the morning of the selection test, you can just get up, get ready, and you can get to it. I like to set an alarm just to prompt me. It just helps just to make sure that I don't have to remember things. Top tip number 2. Okay, so my top tip number 2, be strategic. There is a massive temptation, I can imagine, I definitely had it, to study right up into the last moment so that you can cram as much information as you possibly can before the selection test. I want to say to you, it's okay to stop. You don't have to study right up into the last moment. Think, is this helpful? Am I taking any information in? Be strategic about what it is that you're studying. Maybe it's not a good time the night before of the selection test to be trying to cram information into your head. That was for, I don't know, the weeks before the selection test. Maybe it might be more helpful to think about the structure of the test, maybe think about how you might break up your time so that when you are doing the test, you can sort of plan ahead and say, okay, I want it to be at this point by this amount of time. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. That's a more strategic way of thinking about the test if you really must think about doing the test. But really think to yourself, is it helping for me to just keep studying and studying? Maybe not. Top tip number 3. Okay, tip number 3. Try to find ways to relax or to unwind. Throughout the clinical psychology doctorate application process, there are sort of peaks of stress. One of them is when we hand in our application. Another one is when we're going for the selection test. For those of you who are fortunate enough to get an interview, that probably will be another one. If you can get better at managing them, then you can perform despite that stress, despite that anxiety. And so if you notice that there are certain things that you are doing when you're feeling anxious that make it worse, it might be a good time to start to interject and do things differently. So if you're finding that your thoughts are whirring, maybe you could try and balance those thoughts. So instead of thinking things like, if I don't get an interview, then I'm not good enough to be a clinical psychologist, you can balance that thought by saying something like, this is just a test and it doesn't define my worth and it doesn't decide whether or not I'm going to be a good clinical psychologist one day. That kind of thing. What can also help is taking deep breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth repetitively. That can help regulate your breathing and your heart rate. But for some people, it might be helpful for them to get out and do exercise, for example. Whatever works for you, just do what it is that you need to do to help you to relax. Top tip number 4. Tip number 4, get some good rest. I mean, it's a no-brainer really. If we don't get good rest, our bodies start to go into a bit of an overdrive. And how do our bodies achieve this overdrive? If we don't get enough sleep, our bodies will pump stress hormones into our system to keep us awake and keep us alert. And those hormones can prevent us from being able to perform in the selection test. Just a couple of ideas in terms of getting good rest. Try spending some time unwinding for the couple of hours before bedtime, ideally without screens. And of course, try to avoid caffeine in the couple of hours before going to bed. Top tip number 5. My last top tip, plan something nice for yourself after. You're going to come to find on this channel that I'm constantly banging on about self-care, There is no bigger priority than self-care. If you can go into the doctorate with that under your belt, then it's going to go a very, very long way. Plan something nice for yourself, because by the time you take this test, you are going to deserve it. You deserve it. For me, that would look like maybe having a nice cupcake or having a nice dinner, something food related, but whatever works for you. Maybe it's calling somebody to have a nice chat, or maybe it's pampering yourself, maybe it's a bit of retail therapy. Whatever floats your boat, just be sure to pamper yourself because you deserve it. I really hope that these top tips were helpful for you guys. If you haven't already, subscribe. I'm wishing you all the very, very best for your selection test. I've been Dr. Melody Smith. See you next time.